Welcome to the Industrial Control System Information Sharing and Analysis Center's monthly public briefing. We'll take another minute or two to give those who are still logging in a chance to complete the process. During this time, I will provide some housekeeping notes. If you are calling in on the telephone, you will find a PIN number on the GoToWebinar application. Please enter this PIN into your phone and press pound. This will allow us to manage your background noise. My name is Debbie Wendell, and I will be moderating today's session. I serve as Community Director for the Center and oversee the Center's human-to-human information dissemination mechanisms. In case you are not yet aware of the full range of collaborative products we have to offer, make sure you check out our LinkedIn group, Twitter account, and website blog posts. Plus, we hope that you will take full advantage of these briefings, as well as our Thursday open forum discussion sessions. Our goal is to get our members accurate, timely, and actionable information in a way that best suits their needs. Today's panel discussion, The Evolution of Information Sharing, features Michael Murray from Carnegie Mellon's CERT CC, Tim Conway from SANS, and Sourcefire's Marc Blackmer as this month's subject matter experts, and will be facilitated by ICS-ISAC Chair Chris Blask. During today's presentation, Chris will take the first few minutes to frame the discussion with an historical overview of information sharing efforts and lead up to the development of the ICS-ISAC's real-time knowledge sharing reference architecture. After that, the panel discussion will begin. We encourage attendees to begin submitting questions now and throughout the panel discussion. I will be attempting to keep as many of you off of mute as possible so that you can speak your thoughts or raise your questions throughout. But please mute your headsets or phones if necessary to help reduce unwanted background noise. When speaking, please introduce yourself and indicate your industry affiliation. Additionally, if you would like to ask a question, you may use the hand raise feature in the GoToWebinar application. After the meeting, a recording of this session will be available on the Center's website. Slides are available upon request. Please contact an ICS-ISAC staff member for further information. So now, without any further delay, Chris, over to you for your overview.
Thank you very much, Debbie, and thanks everyone for showing up today. So when we look at where we are by any definition, it's all based on information sharing. And we, of course, can look at into the last several years, the last several decades. But we can really take this all the way back to the beginning. 7 million years ago, our early ancestors learned that hitting things with a stick was slightly better than hitting with a hand. That by itself was enough to keep them alive half the way to the present. About 3.5 million years ago, another version of our ancestors found that breaking a rock was a handy thing. And they told other folks about that, and that turned out to be enough to help them, if not rule the world, at least flourish for another half the distance between now and then. So about 1.5 million years ago, they learned that breaking both sides of the rock, hey, even better, now I have a knife edge. A couple 100,000 years ago, tie those things together. I have a rock and a sharp stick. Gosh, changes everything. At this point, we really started to break out of the box. Our ancestors were then ruling the world from end to end, undisputed. Into modern times, the last couple 100,000 years, last couple tens of thousands of years, we really dominated. We've set up an entire different way of doing things that is unique from the information sharing by genetics. Now we're willfully sharing information and managing information, bringing us to the modern Homo cyber that we are today. And as we see this acceleration, we can look at it, specifically in human history, and we can map our success to our ability to share information, share knowledge with each other. Whether it's 60,000 years ago, crossing the Red Sea, the Bab el-Mandeb, and spreading out across Eurasia and the Americas. Along the way, in the last 10,000 years, we discovered that containing information, the beginning, I suppose, of information security, where having walls and a gate around someplace like here in Yemen, with the cradle of mankind, the Bab el-Yemen, the gate in the walls, where you can have information hygiene and security and safety inside the walls, allowed early civilizations over the last 1,000 and 2,000 years to create networks like the Silk Road, where not just goods were transported between these centers of stability, but the information, the knowledge about those goods. so that Europeans, for example, could learn that silk exists and that porcelain exists, figure out how that's made, how that's done, and start creating it themselves. And then build the empires they did, like the British Empire in the last several centuries, again, accelerating the time that our evolution is occurring based on our effectiveness of sharing knowledge. So, of course, in the last several hundred years, the European empires and culminating with the British Empire took knowledge and compressed it into packets of wood that sailed around the world, and not just changed the world by domination through warfare, but also by taking knowledge and information to far-reaching places, which of course takes us to today. It's almost such a glib understatement in today's world that, gosh, we sure are connected. That sometimes you have to step back a little bit and look at the spans of time, both in some perspectives quite long, in others not that long at all, where we've gone from an ability over thousands and tens of thousands of years to hundreds of years to decades to years to days, moments now to communicate not just with a handful of points, but with thousands and thousands of points. So we're control system folks, right? So it's worth taking a look at what of this knowledge really matters in our context. And we may be biased, however, there's lots of reasons to think that the knowledge of how to control nature is really at the root of our success as a species, our ability to grow and have civilizations. The knowledge that you can take gourds, for example, and put pieces of the environment, water itself, the fount of life, literally, inside a gourd and control it and take it with you across otherwise barren lands. That is incredibly powerful information. Pardon me for 1 second. Well, I seem to have lost my slides. But since we can, as they come back up, so the ability to control that same resource, to control water and move it into fields and create agriculture, to have civilizations that could be stable enough to support the knowledge that we, sorry, 1 second, catching up, blink, 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 and the knowledge of how to get our presentations working again. So, to build civilizations by controlling the environment, and to take the knowledge of how to do that, encapsulate that inside the guilds, the knowledge of how to take water from underground. The Kanats from 3,000 years ago are still creating an oasis in the desert. They were created by the knowledge shared that water existed under the sands, that using certain particular methods could be brought to the surface and put to human use. The Romans had plumbing much like today. The knowledge of how they did that was shared to the present, into the Middle Ages. The knowledge of how to take water and wind and turn that into power informed the evolution that led into the British Empire and the Victorian era of systems much like the physical mechanical systems, much like the electromechanical systems and levels of complexity that we build today. These systems then, of course, connected by networks with ever-increasing complexity to lead to the modern society we have, the megalopolises. Rome was a city of 1 million people, which was stretching the limits of infrastructure at that time. Of course, we've gone far beyond that today. So now we compress that time. If we look at the last several decades, look at since 1980, for example, perhaps, when electric and electronic infrastructures were put in place of the physical mechanical infrastructures to control our physical processes, our industrial processes. Because the facilities we've been creating, the processes we're creating, are complex beyond our ability to simply take knowledge from the previous generation, from the journeyman to the apprentices, and educate that way. Now we have systems that are so complex that it's not so much the relation of the electromechanical pieces to each other that's important, it's the information contained within them, to the point that as you watch these diagrams that are taken from snapshots over the last 2 decades, you see that the way these systems are described focus more and more on the information infrastructure themselves. How do I take knowledge of the pumps, of the valves, of the voltages, and share that with internal components? How do I take the information and turn it into knowledge that I can use? And of course, these information systems, these infrastructure systems, which are becoming information systems, inevitably find themselves using not just the same technologies as the information technology systems that we use in business and offices, but literally the same mediums, and specifically the internet. You know, the air gap conversation that we can't help having these days, where I would like to be able to take this facility and not connect it to anything else, have a problem in reality. They both don't work because quite often the systems are connected literally to the internet, and more importantly, they don't work because an isolated system dies. You know, somehow I have to get new information into that system. Somehow I have to get new information out, whether it's connected to the internet, whether it's done with a USB thumb drive or a CD-ROM. So we have to deal with connectivity, which would be good, except, of course, we have evil hackers amongst us out in the world who are going to come and bring down our systems and eat our kidneys, which is not all good. So if, in fact, this whole theory is correct, and that knowledge sharing is the root of security, then we need to start breaking that down. What is it? How do we do that? What sort of knowledge do we need to be sharing? Well, it's very clear that at the end of the day, there's three major chunks. We need to know who we are. You know, if I am a facility, I am a publicly owned, and I am mandated by laws to do things certain ways, or I'm investor-owned, and my mandate is to fulfill shareholder needs, or whatever it is. What duties do I have? What capabilities do I have? You know, what do I have in my hands? What am I made of? If I'm a facility, what is my actual inventory of infrastructure? You know, what are my HMIs, PLCs, devices? What do I have? If I'm a nation, what facilities do I have? If I don't know what I have, then again, you know, anything else is going to be complicated to do. And of course, add to that, what is it doing? You know, if again I'm a facility and I have HMIs and PLCs and switches and they talk to each other over certain ports and MAC addresses and IP addresses and certain patterns, I should know those things. If I don't know those things, it's like not knowing that the temperature in the cauldron or the chemical composition of the water or the mixture is at a given state in any given moment. So I have to know those things. Whether I'm a nation, whether I'm a state, whether I'm an international community, I need to know who I am, I need to know what I have, I need to know what's doing. So that in the end, we can take all of this progress and progression and use it to develop adaptive self-healing infrastructures, which is very much the point of what we're all about today, and hopefully in the panel we can drill into at some depth. But these infrastructures, for all the complexity, at the end of the day, end up being purposed for very simple reasons, so that we can take one source of knowledge, whether it's someone like Marc at a vendor like Sourcefire, or it's someone at SANS, or it's someone at US CERT, or it's an independent researcher or a facility or whatnot, something new has been learned. Have that shared in real time with someone else. In our case, the ISAC. In other cases, whoever it may be, it can be shared with CERT-CC, and therefore, you know, based on their sharing needs, their sharing paradigm, moved around with others. At any rate, goes from one center to others, and then propagates into the infrastructure itself, where people can use that knowledge, and use it not in the timelines that we've been working with, where someone will do some research over a period of days or weeks. We'll write a paper or a PDF. We'll share that by email. Other people will read it. You know, as this whole description is pointing, we're dealing with time compression, time dilation. You know, we don't have time. Our adversaries are not likely to give us time to have those days and weeks to contemplate. We need to create knowledge. We need to vet knowledge. We need to share and apply knowledge faster than our adversaries are using it. So that in this case, for example, in the lower left-hand corner, I'm an electric transmission utility. I take this piece of knowledge. I put a monitoring rule in place so I can protect myself now. And this is where we get the value of emergent information processing, which is really behind the internet and the business and the whole modern economic and commercial paradigm, where knowledge is used to create more knowledge. In this example, perhaps that facility runs a forensic report, sees that they first had this problem 6 weeks ago. That 6 days ago it started to trend upward, and the last 6 hours is really, really spiking. they could share perhaps that much knowledge, perhaps only in those words, not who they are, but I'm an electric utility, I've had that experience over the last 6 weeks. Take that knowledge, share it back up with nodes however they get there, or it can be ramified around the rest of the network. So, for example, Mike at CERT can decide to share some knowledge, can start getting feedback, and see that while he knew that it was happening to the electric sector, in 5 minutes he sees that it's been happening in water, particularly over the last month and a half, and the last 3 weeks starting to show in manufacturing and transportation. So we have to lead to these adaptive networks if we're going to maintain the stability that we currently have, that we've built to date in our culture. So again, how do we do that? Well, as Debbie mentioned in her introduction, as the ISAC, we've been talking about a reference architecture for a long time and working with other groups to do that. What that really means at the end of the day is that we all together will find a way to define what people can do. If I am a facility, for example, what process, what technology can I reasonably apply given my realistic limitations and resources that allow me to define who I am, what I have, what inventory, what activity, how do I see change. That we can agree on ways to transport some of that information in the form of knowledge, using specific replicable means. In the technical world, schemas and transports. How do I describe it? There are standards out there. Sticks and taxi are particularly high-level, likely candidates to be used for all this. Some other things like IODEF and the Collective Intelligence Framework have been around for a while. But what we need to do is decide amongst us that this field will have this value to indicate this, and that vendors like Sourcefire and others, and centers like CERT can know that here's how I produce a product that someone can use that speaks the same language, and here is how I understand what facilities are saying when their systems talk to me. And in this process, just determine what are the privacy issues, what are the legalities, how do we motivate people to be involved. So to these ends, we've been working with some groups, including the Southern States Energy Board, which is a group of 16 governors, state governors in the Southeast states, and the U.S. Cyber Institute, currently working with people in Washington and people in the state level and so forth to build support for a pilot where we implement this at enough organizations. And inside the ICS-ISAC, working with vendors and organizations like Sourcefire. Marc is involved in helping us document the reference architecture, for example, and move this whole thing forward. So, finally leading us into where we're going with the panel discussion, this is the current state. This is where we are right now. And as most of the folks listening now and to the recording later on are probably aware, February 12th, the President of the United States issued an executive order mandating that the federal government get its act together and work to secure national infrastructure. There's a particular emphasis on information sharing in that executive order, in the associated presidential policy directive, with sections like the Section 4 of the deliverables in the PPD 21 mandates that the Department of Homeland Security will work on a national situational awareness system and will, in this calendar year, make something like that work, at least on the framework level. That the National Institutes of Standards and Technologies will create a cyber framework, again, in this calendar year, to provide guidance on information hygiene and how organizations should follow forward with that. So, last bit of detail before I open up for the panel discussion and so forth. The DHS, for example, those of you on the phone are by definition likely to be valid and viable contributors to efforts like what's on this last image is the Department of Homeland Security's Integrated Task Force. And this is breaking down into 8 different sections. The Situational Awareness and Information Exchange, the SAIE, is meeting weekly right now and is a window for those of you who would like to know into what DHS is doing to fulfill its mandates under the executive order. And the Research and Development Group, again, from our perspective, we see these 2 threads of activity on behalf of the federal government and the DHS to be particularly productive. It's quite something to see, given for those of us who have been watching, that 20 years ago and 10 years ago and even 5 years ago, there wasn't any focus like this whatsoever in the U.S. federal government, as an example. and today there very much is. So the question in front of us is, where does this go in a year, in 2 years, in 3 years, in 5 years? And given our responsibilities, whichever they are, whether we're asset owners or vendors or subject matter experts, what role can we play in this to drive it all forward? So bringing this really close to the present day, many of you probably know that ICS-CERT, the Industrial Control System, Cyber Emergency Readiness Team, part of the U.S. federal government, issued an Amber Alert on Wednesday. This was not publicly issued. The ICS-ISAC put out a notice to its members that day, and this notice is about attacks, active threats against infrastructure in the U.S. that are currently ongoing. It's as a particular threat, it's very important. Anybody with involvement with energy sector and water sector, for example, should be trying to talk to ICS-CERT to get information to help them guide them forward. It's also a very timely indication of where we are with information sharing. And since this has been, as you can see on the screen there, while the details, the information were not shared even with us at the ISAC, they haven't been shared with integrators or vendors or a lot of people, the media did get their hands on it. So that by itself is an interesting point in where we're getting with information sharing and what's working and what's not working. So I've used my time slot for this pretty thoroughly. So I'm going to ask you, Debbie, to take it away from me and introduce the panel and get us into the question and answer session. For anybody who hasn't popped a question into the box already, I encourage you to do so and help us drive all this forward. So Debbie, over to you.
All right. Thank you, Chris, for that fascinating overview. And while we've certainly come a long way over the last few million years, there still seems to be a long way we have yet to go. But we have an exciting panel lined up today to help us further expedite the evolution of information sharing discussions. Michael Murray is a member of the technical staff in the CERT program at the SEI, or Software Engineering Institute. The CERT program includes the well-known CERT Coordination Center, or CERT-CC. Currently, Michael serves as technical manager of the CERT-CC Incident Analysis Team, which supports a number of internal and external response and analysis capabilities. In recent years, the Incident Analysis Team has contributed to the development and maturation of a number of information sharing and collaboration programs across a number of critical infrastructure and key resource sectors. Marc Blackmer's career and experience build on his early work as a technician and engineer. He quickly capitalized on his firsthand experience to rise to prominence at ArcSite, now part of HP, where he functioned as principal sales engineer for several divisions, including strategic accounts, Eastern U.S., and the U.S., Canada, Latin American division. He is currently senior manager of industry solutions at Sourcefire. As Technical Director for ICS and SCADA programs at SANS, Tim Conway is responsible for technical component development, review, and implementation within the SANS, ICS, and SCADA product offerings. In addition to his responsibilities at SANS, he is chair of the NERC-CIP Interpretation Drafting Team, a member of the NESCO Advisory Board, current chair of the NERC-CIP-C GridX Working Group, and is chair of the Smart Grid Cybersecurity Panel for the NBISE, the National Board of Information Security Examiners. Chris, the floor is now yours to begin the panel portion of today's session.
All right, thank you, Debbie. So since I've drawn such a long-term backdrop to all this, I'd be interested in starting by getting each of the panelists to give some of their thoughts. So I'll go around the table in the order that were listed here on this next slide. So Mike, you've been involved with CERT, and for everyone else's background, and perhaps I'll let you go into this and get up my soapbox a little bit, but CERT at Carnegie Mellon first arose in 1988 after the Morris worm outbreak drove this issue of information sharing to the forefront. And as such has been the fount of all national centers and all incident response teams since. And Mike, I think you've been with CERT for quite some time, and if you wanted to start with a little background on you and the center and some of your thoughts on where we've gotten to right now. That might be a good way to take this forward.
All right, I'll try my best. Thanks, Chris. So as you mentioned, I have been with CERT for some time now, about 9 years I've been around, and I've seen a significant shift sort of in the community of CERTs, of computer security incident response teams, and in general in the attention that cybersecurity gets. To speak a bit to the growth of the community, in 1988, when the Morris worm hit, and sort of the powers that be, mainly the Pentagon and other parts of the government, got together and said, we're going to have to do something about this. Right now, not a big deal. This guy was out, not trying to do anything nefarious, but we could see where this could go, and they had the forethought to start bringing together a group of security professionals to consider really what is the risk and what will the risk look like going forward. And that's where the CERT-CC came from and what's now the CERT program. We started out really as the response capability for the internet, right? So it was still the early days. There weren't a whole lot of things connected that weren't academic or defense related. So it was sort of small, and obviously things didn't stay small for very long. So after, I believe, a couple of years, this is obviously still before my time, but there was a transition in the role of CERT-CC and the CERT program moving forward from trying to be the place that handles everything to helping develop teams across the globe and then hopefully interconnect those over time. And for a number of years, even into my early years here, I think that those relationships were fairly easy to wrap your hands around. You were probably talking hundreds of organizations that we're talking. And now we're talking hundreds of organizations that are just what we call CERTs with national responsibility. So response teams that have been given by their governments specific doctrine to protect the economic, the national security interest of their nation. And then within each nation, obviously, we have individual organizations that each have their own CERT teams and have all of the owner-operators of all of the equipment. And really what I think that's grown into is, so to kind of play off the evolution slide that Chris had early on, we went from all being humans and sort of in the interest of survival of the race, we collaborated and we shared. And I think that over time, especially when you start talking about bringing in organizations that are functioning within the same business area and have the potential to establish a competitive advantage based on their ability to, convince customers that they are better or worse in some aspect than their competitors, you really have to work hard, or we've seen in a number of cases, it's challenging to bring folks back together with that sort of survival of the race attitude. A lot of folks, and especially when you start looking across organizations, you end up with a varying levels of folks within organizations talking. Once you get the lawyers involved, things slow down considerably. So the big challenge, I think, that, and this may not be the most exciting part of this presentation for a lot of the techies, but developing relationships and building trust, establishing trust amongst the community, convincing everybody that you do share a common thread and that you're there really because you're fighting the same fight. You've got the same weapons. You're protecting the same types of assets. You have to convince everybody of that, and the biggest thing we've seen help there is start bringing folks together with appropriate caveats to how you share information and things. Get folks in the same room, start sharing notes about what is the threat you're seeing, and over time that'll develop into a kind of a regular exchange and continue to grow from there. I think that obviously, people are thinking, well, how do you get everybody all together in the same room? That's where organizations like the ISACs, the information sharing and analysis organizations that have kind of sprung up from very formal to very informal relationships, provide great value and can act as sort of a force multiplier in this slide that showed sort of tying the different silos together. I think it's important to build those silos to bring people together around their common thread, their common interests, and talk about the threats they're seeing. But then tying those together is really the key part, and that's how you kind of expand crowdsourcing beyond the immediate constituency or the folks that share the immediate same interests and get that broader perspective. The example Chris used of this is being seen in electric, but if we share it across, we start seeing the same threats in water. And is there a common technology set that's making us a target, or is there some specific project going on? Why are we being targeted? And who's not seeing it can be just as interesting. But that can come down to then a matter of information overload. So if you start sharing all this information and certain sectors aren't seeing the threats, or they're not able to handle the influx of information, they can pretty quickly drown in it, right? You're looking for the needle in the needle stack is what it ends up amounting to. And that can be frustrating for organizations that have limited budgets to handle this. So I think kind of moving forward, the automation is a big piece of this, and the mention of sticks and taxi and IODEF and SIF and things like abuse helper and all of those pieces, they're getting broader adoption within certain circles here, right? Within some of these silos, they're being picked up. And one of the next challenges, so challenge one right now should be the easy one, which is getting people to communicate across these. I think we're going to face a challenge with even with some of those standards or things like IODEF and sticks. There's some intricacies with how those get implemented within one of these silos. It's going to be really important that somebody takes hold of understanding those intricacies and building the translators that allow the like information to flow across these as we move further away from sort of human-to-human interaction or human consumable threat reporting to more of the machine-readable. And again, though, it doesn't deal away with the need for trust, right? It's all a matter of, and in a lot of cases, trust without attribution. You need to be able to learn to trust someone without knowing necessarily who they are. That can be a tough thing to bite off. With that, I guess I'll hand it back to Chris. Those are my initial thoughts.
And good thought there. And I put that one slide I think you were talking about back up for a second as well, because this is, because we find ourselves talking about these things a lot because it gets daunting and it's easy to stand back and say, well, we can't or we're not going to be able to. And a couple points that you touched on, and starting with the base principle that if we're all correct, these threats will increase over time, as they have increased over time, as this last week is showing us as well. And we can draw a conclusion from there that if we can't figure out how to do this, if we can't figure out how to share information knowledge effectively in near real time, expanding trust boundaries and so forth, then we'll lose. And we'll be unable to keep the lights on, we'll be unable to keep the water flowing. That is, I suppose, possible. I don't really think that's going to be the case. And as someone who's both an individual and has worked with a number of organizations during this period, I see every reason to think we can do this. And to the point of information overload you touched on, Mike, it's when you build a network like this, a real mesh topology, not star like it's showing here, we just have to be looking from a perspective, and say that that going up towards Maritime in the upper left in this screen, that knowledge center at the Maritime ISAC, for example, it can have asset owners who only have certain equipment and only share certain information with them and allow them to filter at that level. Not only do we already see this in amongst ourselves, but we see this personally in our lives all the time. How is our Aunt Gertrude dealing with information overload and internet connection? So our ability as humans, as organizations, to filter down to what's important to us on an aggregate is well known, and our ability to inside our little cubby holes and our little silos to work this out. This is in the very early days of putting this center together. Was one of the first things we thought of, is that asset owners may want to say, I only have Hirschman, I don't have RuggedCom, I use General Electric but not Invensys or whatever, and only share that information with them. That's easy. So without letting me get back onto my soapbox, I'm going to ask, I think, let me get back to my intro slide here. Tim, you were next on my round of guinea pigs to get to toss in initial comments, and both as SANS, which is, of course, I think as most anybody here today or listening to this later will know, a very large organization, very pivotal in security as a whole, and in content and knowledge and knowledge sharing and training and so forth. But also as someone who's spent a great deal of time in the asset owner space, I think your thoughts and insights are particularly valuable. So if you want to take a few minutes of our time, feel free, and we'll sit back.
Will do. Thanks, Chris. So I'll just talk briefly about my background and kind of move into some of my thoughts of what I've seen throughout my career. Just briefly, in regards to SANS, they have kind of matured and evolved and developed, much like the earlier slide that you showed with humans ourselves, as an organization that's really built around training humans as the environment has changed and the needs that different humans have needed from a training perspective, from a knowledge perspective. SANS as an organization has kind of followed that. I've been with them, can be considered a newborn. I've been there for a couple of months, but I've been aware of SANS and working with them kind of in my professional and career development role ever since I got involved in what I'll call IT security or operations technology. And I've seen kind of their training programs improve and shape and modify and focus on kind of developing and new areas. And I've seen their capabilities for deploying and training people change and improve, and just different focus areas come up. And that's really when I came to SANS, is they've moved into a industrial control system focus area that I see as extremely exciting and a huge challenge that I had when I was with the asset owner space. So the sector that I come from, where I wouldn't be considered a newborn, I'm more of a teenager, is from the electric utility. So I work for a large electric and gas combined utility located in the Midwest, and I spent 15 years of my career in the control center operations technology environment, where we managed the energy management systems responsible for kind of transmission control and generation control. We also did support work for generation control systems in the plants and communication networks out to the transmission substations. We also had, the previous speaker had mentioned kind of the lawyers and the legal side and the framework. I was also responsible for the compliance components of the regulation that impacts electric utilities, specifically from a NERC perspective. And the areas that I was over had involved the reliability standards, kind of what is commonly referred to as the NERC 693 set of standards, has primarily focused on kind of how we trim our trees and how we run our generation units and how we train our operational personnel, but also a whole other set of standards commonly referred to as the CIP standards, which are the Critical Infrastructure Protection Standards. And that set of standards is, very, very focused on the cybersecurity of those assets that are critical to our operations. So being in that environment for my career, we often saw the way things happen in an operational space. So entire information sharing systems, reliability coordinator information sharing that the operators would use so that when something happened in their operations space, they would update that information system so the neighboring utilities would become aware of a constrained environment or a contingency that could impact their operations. And it was a real-time 24/7 operator-to-operator communication environment that still exists today, and it's mandatory today for information posting and updates and sharing from entities to the reliability coordinators. So that, as a model, became something that was something that on the cyber side became a focus, that through NERC and through its regulatory arm, the development and support of information sharing and incident response programs that provided some guidelines for entities that if an incident or an event of interest occurred in your environment, a requirement for sharing that information up, either as an incident, a mandatory requirement, or as an event of interest, kind of through a voluntary report, up to the ICS-ISAC, the Electric Sector Information Sharing and Analysis Center. And I think that's something that as the ISACs look to other areas of success, so some of the financial, the ISACs in the financial sector, or within the statewide, the multi-state ISAC, looking at the ES-ISAC, there's some very specific capabilities and some process that's been put in place because of the authorities that NERC has through the Federal Power Act. So they've been given the ability to do some things that I think help. And as you mentioned, the executive order, and as you mentioned kind of the path that things seem to be maturing and evolving, I think the other critical infrastructure key resource sectors could look to the electric sector and see kind of where the future is going. And I'll talk to some of those capabilities that exist at the ES-ISAC. So as a formal process, they have a information sharing or alerting process that I spoke to. So from an asset owner, any of the NERC registered entities that are subject to the critical infrastructure protection standards, there is a standard CIP 08 that focuses on incident response and an incident response plan with reporting and notification guidelines provided. So as information flows up from the entities to the ES-ISAC, or as the ES-ISAC receives information from any of its peers through government agencies or other ISACs or ICS-CERT, they process that information. They have a dedicated team of subject matter experts referred to as the HYDRA team that reviews the information, determines the potential impact based on our sector specific, and drafts and releases either an alert or an advisory, very similar to the ICS-CERT and US-CERT processes. However, the difference is ES-ISAC has the capability of deploying that to all registered NERC entities, so all kind of asset owners that are generator owners or operators or transmission owners and operators, the various people that are registered throughout the NERC system. They have the ability to deploy that to all of those entities, and they have, through their Federal Power Act capabilities, the ability, if the alert or advisory is of a significance, they can require acknowledgement response from all entities in a certain time frame. So all of the asset owners and operators would need to view the alert, acknowledge the receipt of the alert, acknowledge they understand the alert. And then another capability that they have through their authority is the ability to survey the asset owners in regards to their status on performing the mitigation or remediation steps that were recommended in the alert. So again, they can get a feedback mechanism of not only did we release the advisory, but we can receive a feedback that people actually have viewed it, and second, that they're taking action on that advisory. So beyond the NERC alert system, there's also the ES-ISAC portal. where there's communities and conversations and shared indicators of compromise and an entire area for asset owners and operators to participate. And what I think we're going to see over time is the other critical infrastructure key resource sectors get to this place with some level of voluntary or regulated authority. Voluntary either through incentives and some levels of protection, or eventually if legislation were to be created that impacts other sectors. But there's a unique capability that I think some of the sectors have, like ICS-CERT or US-CERT, that cuts across the sectors. So everything I just spoke to is in regards to the electric sector. But a lot of the assets that we use or threats that we see or vulnerabilities that we see are not unique to the electric sector. And they cut across the sectors. And I think that's where kind of the ICS-CERT and US-CERT play an important role in deploying that information across the sectors. But at the same time, I think this group that we're on the call with now, the ICS-ISAC, I think they provide an exciting area in that they cut across all the sectors to provide an information sharing perspective. So the focus on someone who's using a piece of industrial control system in the water sector that may also be being used in the electric sector or in chemical, that they can come together in a spot and have the discussions of who they are, how they're using the assets, and what they're seeing, and specifically what they're seeing that's abnormal. So if you're looking at your systems and you have the knowledge of what normal looks like and something abnormal appears and other people are seeing the same exact thing, that has a much higher level of interest than if it's just happening at your environment. And if it's just happening in your environment, you would tend to think it's a configuration issue, it's some type of system failure. But if the same exact events are happening in other people within your sector or at other companies outside of your sector, or even more important, everybody who's using a particular device, it would be far more interesting and would definitely raise the level of concern. I think the hurdle that needs to be overcome is that the recognition from an organization that we're all kind of companies within companies. While I was with a utility space, we performed energy trading just like a financial trading company. We dealt with kind of bill payment and bill processing, just like a point of sale as customers had to pay the bills. And the recognition of others that, you know, kind of trading firms and Google, they while they're in a particular kind of sector or vertical, that they also use industrial control systems, whether they be for facility management or some type of, you know, Walmart and their packing and inventory or shipping or warehousing, that they all kind of have an industrial control system reliance. So while they may not see themselves as an industrial control system entity, we're all kind of businesses within businesses. And that level of awareness that there are areas that you should be concerned with, I think is a large hurdle. And the second is the acknowledgement that, you know, many of us have been trained, you know, the loose lips sink ships kind of an approach, and we're moving to the if you see something, say something approach. Just the ability to have that trusted communication with the people who need that knowledge, and the ability to have that level of secure communication as well. The key point that drives all of it is that the threat actors, the people that we're competing with, they are sharing information very well. They're doing it very, very effectively, and we need to get to that level. And the last piece that I'll say is many companies have a relative reluctance to share information. Where I think we're eventually going to evolve to is kind of the automated information sharing, where certain sectors have the ability to put in devices that will gather information, do some level of sanitization, and roll it up to a clearinghouse for review. And that's one of those things that many people don't really consider, but it's happening a lot in a lot of businesses now with for example, the antivirus companies that are gathering statistics and gathering information and reports, you know, configured by default to share that up for their own analysis and review and reporting and tracking. That's happening already. And if we were to move to network flows and other things that would go to certain aggregators that could do reviews and provide some situational awareness back down. I think we're going to be moving in the right direction to get to where our adversaries are today. That they have the ability to share information rapidly, and they are. We need to get to that point just as fast as they did. So,
yeah.
Chris, I'll open it back up to you.
Yeah, very, very well said, Tim. That's and particularly, I mean, yeah, at driving to the end, the last couple of things you said. I mean, this is, the reality is that the other guys are doing this, and we can, say that we'd rather not, perhaps, and that may or may not be correct, but it may not make any difference, because if the bad guys are doing this and it's working really, really well for them, we will either lose or we'll find a way to do it ourselves. And to you, I pulled up this last slide, this reference architecture slide, because you were saying just a minute ago about the monitoring, and this is something that I've been an advocate of for a long, long time. I guess coming on 10 years now, but and it can be contentious. But as you said, we're basically all doing this already, and gathering some information. So again, to the evolution point, we have in-hand experience where companies like the antivirus companies and others already have mechanisms in place, have anonymization mechanisms, legal mechanisms, where they can take certainly not all the proprietary information from a company, but the knowledge of aspects of that information, that their experiences with viruses are such, and share those, with others, and get emergent value and derive knowledge from that. We're doing that today. So the idea that we'll have both the capability, to have facilities have situational awareness at all, and the fact that anyone don't right now is kind of appalling. It's understandable, but not knowing what you have and what it's doing is a problem. But with that in hand, the idea that we can share some of that, and again, it's not as shocking when you look at it incrementally. We're already doing this pretty well everywhere else. We can do this in ways that isn't sharing everything. This is not the Soviet Union. This doesn't really mean the federal government's going to come and, putting cameras, in the restrooms. It's different than that, but it can be done. And again, to your point, if we can't do it, maybe that we just lose. And the last point, what you brought in about NERC. This goes to questions we get all the time, and some was raised already here today from the audience. Is what mandates will what mandates will the executive order put in place for utilities to share information? This was the question, and the short answer is we don't know. A longer answer is if the private sector is unable to or unwilling to figure out a way to do it, you can pretty well count on the public sector doing it somehow. And we can look at, as you say, areas where it's being done now, and the ES-ISAC and NERC, because of the unique position of the electric sector, show us how some of this is being done. In some cases, electric utilities, not all, but some, generation and transmission at least, don't have a choice. They have to do things certain ways, and they work through that, and they continue to work through that. So will this happen through the executive order with other sectors? It remains to be seen.
What I would say that looking at where it's eventually going to go, and looking at the electric sector, I think it's like predicting the sunrise. You know where it's gonna go and when it's gonna happen. The difference is the time frame it took to get there. So NERC was a voluntary organization for 40 years. They're talking, they're creating kind of a framework through the executive order that will be voluntary. I don't think it's going to be voluntary for 40 years before legislation comes along, like what happened in the electric sector, that gave FERC the authority to name an ERO, which was NERC, and gave them the federal ability to mandate and enforce regulation. I don't think it's going to take 40 years for that to happen. I think it's going to be voluntary for a period, and then something is going to cause some level of regulation sector by sector for kind of protective measures and information sharing and incident response capability. I think it's obvious to me where it's going to go. It's just the only question is how long is it going to take for that to occur.
Yeah, and my last point before I turn over to Marc for his comments and so forth. I think you're exactly right. The question may be, that how long it's going to take. But even there, it's not a completely open question. It's not going to be 40 years. It's not going to be 10. It's not going to be 5 days, but it's somewhere between those, and you can narrow that down. It won't be the next 5 days or 50 days. It could be 150 days if something terrible happened on Wednesday. Be amazed how fast things can happen when there's consequences. And if something dramatic happened in a couple months, I would expect it to things like this to happen. I can't imagine it being more than 5 years. It doesn't seem that following the curve of the growth of the threats and so forth, that we really have 60 months of choosing whether or not we'll do anything. And so if as asset owners and as people in the private sector, if 5 years have gone by and we haven't gotten any ability to at least know what we have and be able to share some of that with others, then someone's probably going to make us. So with that, Marc, you've been blessedly quiet out there, which is unlike you entirely. And as I know,
I'm not sure what to read into that when you say blessedly quiet.
No, I couldn't help myself. But so you've been both have been and are now in the vendor space at interesting vendors, that focus specifically on the technologies and the capabilities of knowing what the hell we have. And you've been involved in this long enough to, I think, speak to some of the evolution there. Because as you and I know, having been in the SIM space, years ago, 10 years ago, okay, it really wasn't there. But today, in the open source space and in the commercial space, technology really does exist to do a lot of this stuff. So with that as much lead as I'm going to give you, I'll let the floor be yours for a few minutes.
Thanks. It's I was thinking of something as we've been talking about this and making some notes, and probably to oversimplify the whole thing. If any of us are parents, and if not, we've all been kids who I'm sure have tried this. If you picture this scenario, Dad, can I go to the movies? No, you can't. You have homework. Trots out of the room, and then you see the kid leave, and you say, well, where are you going? Well, Mom said I could go. So the very basic lack of information sharing, so starting that conversation and put up this united front. So yeah, it's an oversimplification. I mean, that's what we're talking about here. And I think to some of what Tim was saying, and having been on the IT side and then on the vendor side, speaking with a lot of customers over the years, in some sense too, we're really at a disadvantage. Our opponents are purpose-focused. Their intent is to break in and to either disrupt, destroy, or to steal. And that's what they do. That's what they're focused on. In reality, those of us who are trying to defend on that typically, unfortunately, are not so purpose-focused. Where we have other day jobs. So in my IT days, security was part of what I did. It wasn't the whole thing. I mean, I hear that from a lot of OT folks. That's just one aspect of their job. And I think the other side of it too, not to be all doom and gloom, but if you take a corporate org structure, works great for HR and payroll and those sorts of things. But our adversaries aren't so polite to stay within industry vertical or within a particular technology or platform. They're going to go the path least resistance to get what they want, whatever serve their purpose. So of course, this is why we're here. So how do you defend against that?
So Marc, let me jump in for just 1 second. Your audio is getting fun. Getting a little Darth Vader-y. So let me, if I could ask you to, maybe what will work is switch, if and go to meeting, switch to telephone and then and dial in, and that'll take that out of the loop. And in the meantime, I'll chat up the other folks in the room.
Will do.
Okay. But Marc raised a very good point, though. Again, the challenge, that adversaries are not restrained. Tim talked to this as well, and we see this in a number of efforts. Many of you listening will have heard of the SHINE project. So last year, a couple researchers, a couple of very good white hats, did some research, found 500,000 control systems connected to the internet, which of course is a problem. And they shared that information with CERT, with ICS-ISAC, who work to identify, notify, and so forth. And with our membership and other groups, EnergySec and others, we've started a conversation, the publicly accessible control system working group, to look into this. And one of the first things that comes up is, how do you build that database? And it's actually easy if you're a bad person. You scan everything. Who cares? And if you topple something over, it's no big deal. And if you do something illegal, like knocking on doors and turning the handles, I mean, you're already a criminal. So again, nobody cares. On our side, the white hats, we're quite often restricted. So these will drive a lot of our technology applications. And as Sourcefire and other vendors and open source developers in our world represent, there are ways for us to do what we can. And this really is, and again, nothing new in the world. In IT, information security, this is what we've been doing for a decade or two. We can't do what the bad guys do. However, we can control inside our own space. Security is defensive instead of offensive for the vast majority of us. So we need to place ourselves in just in a realistic frame to look at what we can do going forward. So while Marc circles around, so we're at Marc's in via the phone. So let me see if we can. Marc, can you? So Marc, you can hear us, but are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
You sound lovely. Yes.
There we go. Perfect ad for Verizon. Okay, sorry about that.
No problem.
So nice. And that was probably the most eloquent I've ever been. I'm sorry you missed it.
Yes, it's okay. Well, I think I had my moment speaking to a mute button. It's probably the best I've ever gotten. So, the bane of our existence these days.
There you go. So, I'm not sure how much you actually heard, and so I forgive me if I repeat some of my stuff. But what I was going to say is, some of what Tim was talking about, for example, one of the things that I've certainly seen, where I feel that we're at a disadvantage. We, the defenders and the keeper of the keys to the kingdom. And the reason I was saying that is, our attackers are very mission-focused, whereas in a lot of organizations you have security is just another part of the job description. So, we can't put the effort in. A lot of places just can't focus the same way our adversaries can, and they don't work 9 to 5. They're not in the same org structure. So again, an org structure is great for HR and payroll, but when it comes to defending against attacks, the attackers are not going to be so polite, in order to stay in how many companies are siloed. So of course, this ability and need for us to share information within teams. I mean, Tim was kind of talking about microcosms, where when I was an IT guy, at one point I was a Windows guy. AS400 people sat on the other side of the wall for me, and the Unix guys were down the hall. Did we talk much? No, not really. So, and you blow that up to a larger view of where we are with organizations and trying to get a full picture. So clearly the need is there. And when I would go and talk to customers, one of the big things that they have asked and still ask is what others like them are doing. You sit down with this large bank, and they want to know what these other large banks are doing, not so much from a competitive perspective, but to make sure that they're where they're supposed to be. And the struggle has always been great. We all know that we need to share information. We all understand the value of it, especially when it comes to security. Why doesn't anyone want to go first? And so I've been very intrigued with kind of the psychology of the information sharing. And I think, as we're looking at this, those of us who are on the panel who are
part of the ICS-ISAC or any other ISAC for that matter, I think we're already part of the choir. But really what we need to be cognizant of, and I believe we are doing, but is to understand that psychology. So we look at it. I think there's one dark cloud is that when people share, it almost seems to be in some cases an admission of failure. There was just this past week, the week before, The Onion posted on their blog about how they were compromised by the Syrian Electronic Army. But also, here's how it happened, and here's what we recommend for you to do to defend yourself. And so right there, the value of them stepping forward, saying, "Yep, it happened to us." It was all over the news. It wasn't like they could walk away from it, but there it was. And that goes a long way. So I think being able to get people past that idea of it's not an admission of failure. It's something that we can now all as a group benefit on. But another thing that's always interested me as well, and I'm interested to hear what my fellow panelists and folks think about this, is we're also, if you look at it, knowledge as a competitive advantage. I mean, we're in a free market economy. So if, let's just say I go out on my own as a consultant, well, why hire me versus another guy? Well, maybe I have more knowledge, more experience that the other guy doesn't have. So, if I share that, then I lose my competitive edge. So what's the motivator for me to share? We can, we all understand it's the right thing to do, but how do we go about it? And I think, Chris, not this slide that you have up now, but the one of the adaptive self-healing architecture, I think actually really does a good job of addressing that or looking at it from a high level. I mean, you think where we can get, say unattributed data, where we want to maintain anonymity for security's sake. We want to share the information, but don't want to necessarily identify. So like that Amber Alert that came out, here's what's going on. We're going to let you know on a need-to-know basis. It's, leaving the specifics out that the bad guys may want to get. But also too, I think there needs to be a mechanism, not just with what we're talking about here, but in knowledge sharing in general, for attribution for those who want it, so that there's a way to encourage people to do that. And then with the role of things like the ICS-ISAC and others, where here we have a library, you can use it. We don't need to necessarily know how you're using it, as long as to help you protect yourself. And I think those are some of the things that I look at a lot when it comes to knowledge sharing. Is just that psychology. How do you balance doing the right thing in I guess even as a species, where self-interest can trump a lot of those things. So before I go too far down the Freudian rat hole, I'm curious to hear how Mike's approached this and Tim as well. So I don't know if you guys have any thoughts. I'm going to put you on the spot, but curious to hear what your thoughts are.
Well, if I can just preface that as well, because I wanted to lead into you guys as well with this, but the Amber Alert has been, Marc mentioned it. It's come up in a couple of questions that have been messaged to me during the call as well. Specifically, was this the Iranians? And again, I don't have the alert. I kind of doubt that the alert says that, or if we can tell, but that's not so much of the point. And the other one, can we share the details of the Amber Alert? Which again, I don't think is the case. But Tim, you have been, you were interviewed on this, so it's publicly known that you have the alert. And of course, Mike, you're from that space. You're from the Carnegie Mellon and the CERT group. So to answer both of the questions that the attendees are asking and Marc's lead, I guess your experiences in the context of this instance we're going through now with this particular alert.
So I'll jump in a little bit, and basically the questions about the who, that's generally speaking, that's something that through my experience I would assume is going to be at a secret or top secret level, and it's one of those things that for whatever reason, even when we get into a synthetic environment of where nothing's real, when we're planning drills and exercises, that seems to be a natural tendency for people to want to know the who of where these types of attacks or where these threats are coming from. And from an asset owner perspective, especially on the operations side, where we are 100% mission focused, meaning we are looking at the reliability and safety of the operations that we are in support of, and we're a component of operations. You know, the cyber assets that are being, you know, targeted or discussed in these various alerts, if those assets were unavailable, the operations are directly impacted. So we generally care a whole lot more about the what than we do about the who. And just going through exercise planning and drills and events like Cyberstorm or NERC Grid X, we're going through that planning now for another grid exercise this year. But generally speaking, as we work through the entire exercise, we're focusing on what we are going to do and how our entities are going to respond and contain. But at some point in time in that planning event, it always, from some level beyond the actual implementers, it becomes a major area of concern of who is doing it, who has the capability to perform this type of an attack that you've created in the drill. And the same kinds of things tend to naturally go that way when these alerts or advisories come out in the real world. Of the asset owners are focusing a lot on what we're talking about and how they would achieve that result. We're not talking a whole lot about who, nor do we care. If it's a kid in their basement, or if it's a hacking organization, or a nation state, for us, it would be awesome if it was an IP address and we knew where it was coming from and how to stop it. And the days of it being an address or a domain or a location are over. So the focusing on the who is definitely a part of the problem. And we focus a whole lot more on the what and the how. In regards to kind of the media attention, you know, it's one of those things that they want to get their hands on the alert. They want to be able to quote things directly out of it. They want to be able to get the most accurate information into their stories. But where ICS-CERT has come and where the kind of alerting capability has come from the government, from where it was to where it is today, is absolutely fantastic. And from my perspective, if that kind of information gets out in the media and it gives them any reason to pause or start to regress in regards to the amount of information they're willing to provide people that you can actually take action on, I think that is an enormous loss for us as the defenders of these environments. So any reason that would give the people a pause to provide details, I would try to avoid at all costs.
This is Mike. I absolutely agree with Tim. I think that until we get the why and the how down, that focusing on who is just expending resources that we don't really have to ship around now. And with respect to the media, I think that's why control of information as we expand these sharing relationships is so important. Little to nothing constructive tends to come from that. It tends to be fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And the better we can do, the more we'll be able to continue building trust amongst those participating and sharing and focus in on the problem that we can affect. And obviously the who is important. We have folks that spend a lot of their time focused in on that. And I think that those that are able should let them focus on doing their job and stick to the what do we actually do about it on our end.
Yeah, it does raise, it raises the issues an awful lot. And this has been, our experience through this this process has been that we've had people asking us about it. We've sought access to it ourselves and haven't gotten it, and a lot of folks haven't, who arguably should be in the know, and at the same time, it appears that some members of the media have had some access to it. So it's and again, I couldn't be more clear. Hopefully, that it's our indications is that ICS-CERT particularly in this case, has demonstrated again a massive evolution. The content of this advisory is much different than in the past. They should be quite satisfied with providing a lot of actionable information because they, as a group, have taken a lot of heat for providing vagueness and not actionability. Our understanding is that this is very useful. It's a good step as advisories go. And I don't know that there is a simple answer to how do you share it enough without sharing it too much. By any definition of it, depending on what the knowledge is you're sharing. But it's certainly at the very least frames the issues for everybody involved who's looking to solve these things. And it's why at the end of the day the executive order and the involvement of the Southern States Energy Board, a group of governors, the state fusion centers, and folks like and organizations like CERT and SANS and so forth, and the experiencing constituents they represent, having all of us, an expanding group of us, work through these issues in the kind of time frame we've talked about in this call, is critical. It absolutely has to get done. It certainly seems to be our only choice, again, perhaps we'll lose this. The ramifications would be, of course, extremely negative. But these are the fine points we need to work through. How do we get, and the other part of that comment that I'd like to get some, since we have some folks on the call who have deeper insight than we do, if there is any information that at this point, 6 days in or 7 days in since the original release, if there's any guidance, that's this being more widely spread, if we can share that or not. But in the energy sector and the water sector that are reported to be the focus of this advisory, how many asset owners really have gotten access to it? Forensically measuring this from the side of ICS-CERT and those involved in that process is going to be very instructive. And how this did or didn't get across sector. How some of those aggregation points, like the integrators. We found a lot of our constituency being the large and small integrators, companies like Prime Controls and like IBM and SAIC and CSC and PwC and so forth. How do we leverage those organizations who themselves have large numbers of contacts? So Mike, if where are we with time? So for the record, we try to keep this is a 90-minute call. We got 12 minutes left in this, so we'll try to keep it a couple minutes early. But Mike, if I made any sense at all with that last little rant of mine, I'd be interested in getting your thoughts, sort of forensic on the fly week into this instance. With what lessons we're learning and perhaps where we can go with it from this advisory.
I think that the biggest thing to recognize is that we are iterating, right? So you mentioned that it doesn't look the same as things have looked in the past. I think that folks are tending to start leaning towards as Tim mentioned, the focus on actionable information, and I think that the organizations that I've sort of watched over the last really 5 to 7 years, they've kind of moved from this broad focus and let's talk about who our adversaries are and why are they doing this to us, to, well, we need to really be sure to get the sharing of the actionable bits right first. And in that vein, so we mentioned the 40 years that NERC was voluntary, and that this isn't going to last that long. I think the clock's been ticking for quite a while. Since even 10 years ago, some organizations existed that the government's had their eye on, and they've been trying really hard to figure out what is the right construct for this over time. So not only are we not going to have 40 years, but the clock's been ticking. So I think that the important thing right now is to get the input of likely the folks that are on the line, right? So the more that the voices of the owners and operators are heard, and their desires, their needs to actually effectuate them doing their business, which is protecting critical infrastructure, the more that that is brought up and displayed and conveyed, the better off we're going to be when the axe does fall and the decision's made as to, is this a regulatory requirement that we start pushing down through the sector-specific agencies, or is this voluntary? Because I'll tell you that my experience is, as soon as something becomes a requirement, people start looking for the loopholes and the best way to skirt the intent, and I don't think we want to see it that way. So the better that organizations like ICS-ISAC, all the ISACs, and the programs that exist now, and even the smaller groups, understand the needs of their constituencies, the better we'll get at this, and probably the less likely we'll have folks kind of playing in our cookie jar.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more. And I think that one of the lessons I think that we can, that I can say really has come up from our experience in this last week and in this, and in the last year putting the center together, has been to see another demographic in play here. In each of the structures, whether it's the ISACs or the sector-specific agencies or the CSE or SEC, GCC structures in the government, are all focusing on the asset owners, which makes sense. However, one of the lessons we're learning is that there are a lot of them, and it's hard for any of us, particularly when something as limited really as the federal government, to speak to all of them directly. For all the reach of the federal government, it's not really well put together to speak to 1.5 million organizations at once. And that's one of the points of contention we've run out across a lot. And as I mentioned a moment ago, it's the integrators. When we look at, as the ICS-ISAC, just how do we get our knowledge out? We can't possibly talk to every manufacturer, every water group. So we have to go through aggregation points. And just going organically through our process of creation and growing the organization, it's been those organizations, been the integrators, who haven't been able to find a home in the knowledge sharing structures, who ended up being one of the largest or the largest part of our constituent group. So I think that's one of the lessons, and they've been pretty well shut out completely from this particular alert. So I think, and we've been raising this in the ITF discussions and in some of the other conversations just during this process, but I think part of the answer will be, how do we, in the end, we're trying to reach the pumps, we're trying to reach the actual infrastructure and the asset owners themselves. But if the initial groups that were set up can't scale past, the CISCP program, for example, the acronym that I won't rattle off at the moment, but the information sharing program inside DHS, had originally been looking at handling a couple dozen organizations, and is now at around 100 and is having trouble scaling. So that seems to be one of the lessons we're taking out of this is that next quantum, that next electron shell of trust relationships and sharing is going to take us to involve other aggregation points that we're not already working with. Did that make any sense at all, Tim?
Yeah, I mean, it just, and in respect of the time, I'll make it real quick. The response to kind of all of that is similar to what I had gone through before, and that ICS-CERT has completely upped the game in regards to what they're putting out and the efforts in regards to getting it to the people who need to take action immediately. So, and then the second piece, the cooperation with the ES-ISAC, and that kind of goes to my comments that the other critical infrastructure key resource sectors are going to get there eventually, and they need to, and that ES-ISAC immediately pushed out a advisory to all electric sector asset owners and operators in details of the alert the alert was included in that push, and other guidance and requests for information from the owners and operators if there was anything that they would like to provide back. It wasn't a mandatory response, but obviously it was a nudge in that direction if there was something that you were seeing that was of importance. So the ES-ISAC's capabilities to immediately move that out and how well they worked with their kind of counterparts at ICS-CERT, I think that is an exact model of where we need to go. This event that came out, the frequency and the sophistication of the types of things that are happening that are getting reported in these alerts, that's something that I think most asset owners, most people would recognize that both are increasing. The sophistication is increasing, the frequency is increasing. But I think what was significant to me about this latest alert was the sophistication is increasing on the other end too. The sophistication of what's being put out as actionable information and the speed at which it's happening and the coordination across multiple different sectors from ICS-CERT over to ES-ISAC and others. I mean, we're talking about it today on a webinar. This is all strong indicators that we are moving in the right direction.
Well, I think that that pretty well answers the closing question I was going to throw out there for you. Is just, but for each of you, in that we've got just a few minutes left. So if we get a short thumbs up, thumbs down, optimistic, pessimistic. Do each of you think that that we're going to win this battle? We're going the right direction. That what seem perhaps to many as insurmountable obstacles are going to be addressed. So I'll start with you, Mike. Do you think, given your experience, do you think we're winning or losing? Do you think we're going to win this in the end?
I think right now we're losing, but I think we're progressing in the right direction. Hard to say in the end, are we going to win? I don't know, because I'd like to spend a lot more time on the beach than I currently do. So I hope that we do win and we can all go have frozen drinks with umbrellas.
Well, that is as informed and cautionary a comment as anybody listening should hope for. So it's yet determined from someone who is in a position to know. Marc, what do you think? You think are you optimistic we're going to win this? Do you think the technology exists and the motivations, or are you still on the fence?
Well, I got to say, Chris, I don't look at it as winning. I don't think we have an end zone. I think it's a matter of being able to adapt. It's just going to be an ongoing dance. I mean, that being said, I'm naturally an optimist, and don't worry, Mike, I'll bring the lines. But yeah, I think it's an idea. We've got to keep looking, as this is just going to continue, and we have to keep upping the game and plan accordingly.
Yeah, very well said, and I couldn't agree more. There is no particular end to this. I suppose the end is when we've all lived our lives and check out, and our society and the infrastructure around it are still here. But so Tim, last word is yours. We're positive or negative on our efforts here?
I'm obviously optimistic. I'm positive. I believe, I agree with the last statement that there is no end. So with that recognition, there is no win or lose. So it's an ongoing effort, and as long as we are continuously improving, which I believe through this discussion and through events of the last 18, 24 months, it is obvious that we are continuously improving. There's the right conversations happening. There's the right level of communication in certain areas that could be looked at and used as a model for other areas. So if we are improving and we know where to go and we know what good looks like, I think we're going to be moving down the right path. And it's just one of those things that as soon as we start moving in that direction and heading in the right path, the adversaries are going to change, and we're going to have to continuously recognize that and recourse. There is no end, but I'm optimistic that we have the capability to continue to adjust.
Yeah, I'm with you. And again, I've said enough from this, but I think that the components are laying around. The technical process, economic components are there for us to be able to do this. And while it may not be a win as such, and I don't frankly believe that we're going to be able to avoid all incidents, that lead to some of the consequences that we all worry about. I think that on average, on aggregate, for the good of our culture and our shared cultures internationally, that we can maintain the upper hand, as long as we don't get too confident in ourselves that we can do that, and don't carry enough stress and carry it to the beach with us and worry about it when we're on vacation and keep working on it. But it can be done. So I want to thank all three of you. This has been a fantastic discussion. I think one of the best we've had so far. I want to thank everybody who's been with us on the phone and all the folks listening to this down the road, and encourage you to stay part of the conversation and let us help as much as we can and help each other. So, Debbie, if you want to take it out, thank you all very much.
On behalf of all of us at the ICS-ISAC, we appreciate your joining us today. We hope that you found the information of value and something that you can take to further the discussion of industrial control system security. Our next briefing will be held Tuesday, June 4th, and feature David Mattis, founder of Asgard Networks, offering a solution-oriented discussion on mitigating ICS exposure. Following that, our regular third Wednesday public briefing will be June 19th and feature Andrew Ginter, VP of Industrial Security at Waterfall Security Solutions, presenting unidirectional gateways and critical infrastructure. Other sessions will be announced in our monthly updates, on the Center's website, and in our other communication vehicles. Thank you again for your participation on today's call, and we hope you have an awesome rest of your day.